In a town forgotten by time, where trouble rides in with the wind and legends fade slower than scars, they chose the wrong person to provoke, and by the time they realized, it was already too late. She stepped down from the wagon in irons. Bare feet met dirt like they hadn't known ground in months. Her dress hung in soiled tatters, wrists shackled in rusted iron. Her face, shaded beneath a curtain of unwashed auburn hair, lifted only when ordered. But her eyes, they didn't belong to a prisoner. They belonged to a storm. The auctioneer spat tobacco into the dust. "Lot 7, he bellowed, indentured for 5 years. Accused of theft, resisting officers, and suspicion of witchcraft." The crowd chuckled, a ripple of boots and buckles shifting on sun-baked ground. They were men with dust on their teeth and greed in their eyes, but even they seemed hesitant. The last woman up for sale had begged. This one didn't say a word. "We start at $15. A silence. The kind that speaks of superstition, of fear wrapped in gossip. "10? Hell, 5 then. She clean, maybe cook. How she breathes, don't she?" Still no one moved. Until he did. A figure at the edge of the crowd. Broad-shouldered. Dust-coated. The wide brim of his hat cast his face in shadow. But the town recognized him by silhouette alone. Calder. Bram. They whispered it the way folks speak about men who bury their own past with their own hands. The widower rancher with eyes like thunderclouds, and a son who hadn't spoken since his mother died. Calder didn't speak. Just held up a single coin. Gold. The hush that followed was not for the amount, but the clarity of intent. The auctioneer cleared his throat. "Sold." She didn't move, not until he stepped forward. "Name?" He asked. She lifted her head. "Lyria." The word was soft. Shaped like something sacred. He nodded once. "You ride with me." Chains clanked. The marshal moved to unshackle her, but Calder stopped him with a glance. "Leave them," the townsfolk murmured. But Lyria understood. This wasn't cruelty. This was warning. She mounted behind him on his mare, and together they rode toward the jagged horizon. Toward the homestead beyond the ridge, where the land ran wide and the ghosts whispered in cottonwoods. The moment they vanished from view, whispers bloomed like weeds. Witch. He bought a curse. Maybe that's what he wanted. A curse to chase away the past. They didn't know Calder Bram, and they sure as hell didn't know Lyria. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. Dust swallowed the hooves of Calder Bram's mare as they crested the last rise before the homestead. Behind him, Lyria hadn't spoken since she'd told him her name. He hadn't expected her to. He hadn't bought a talker. He'd bought a presence. Oh, wait. And wait, Calder had learned, was often quieter than wind. The ranch came into view like a scar in the earth-sprawling fences of split timber. A barn hunched like a sleeping dog, and the house. 2 stories of weathered stubbornness. The paint had long since peeled off, and Calder never thought to replace it. Some things, he figured, had to stand honest against time. He dismounted, swung down like he did everything, without a sound, without wasting motion. He turned to help her, but Lyria had already slid down, her feet hitting the ground without ceremony. The chains between her wrists clanked, still bound. Still silent. "You hungry?" Calder asked. A nod, nothing more. "Then you'll eat." He took her inside. The kitchen was plain, clean only by habit, not pride. A pot of beans simmered on the cast. Iron stove. Bread, hard from morning, lay under a cloth. He took a tin plate, loaded it, and handed it to her. She sat without being told, ate without thanks. Not greedy. Not slow. Just ... methodical. Across from her sat a boy of maybe 6. Dark hair. Hollow eyes. Mouth sealed like it had forgotten how to form words. This was Bram Jr., but the town only knew him as the boy who stopped speaking when his mother died. He stared at Lyria. She didn't look away. Finally, Calder spoke again. That's my son. Folks call him Bram like me. The boy blinked. Lyria finished her last bite. Then she did something that made Calder set down his fork. She leaned forward and gently placed her tin plate beside the boy's, then using her cuffed hands, broke the last piece of her bread in half, offered it. The boy hesitated, then took it, and ate. That night, Calder slept in the barn. He told himself it was for appearances. That no matter what tongues wagged back in town, he wouldn't be the man who dragged a chained woman into his bed. But deep down, Calder knew it wasn't appearances. It was fear. Not of her. Of what she might wake in him. Lyria lay on the cot in the front room. He'd left her the fire, the cot, the wool blanket that still smelled faintly of rosemary and smoke. She hadn't asked for anything else, and she hadn't slept. Her eyes, ember bright in the firelight, stared at the dark ceiling as if trying to remember what stars looked like. In her chest, a storm churned, not of anger, not even of sorrow, but of memory. Chains were nothing new, hunger neither, but kindness? Kindness required processing, required caution. And Calder Bram's kindness felt like a puzzle piece from a different box entirely. By the third day, Calder had removed the chains. She didn't thank him, didn't he do. He simply found her, beside the trough where she'd been, scrubbing the feed buckets. The water turned gray with old oats and sun-dried dirt. Her wrists were bare, save for the red bruises where metal had left its echo. He stepped beside her and handed her a tin of salve. She looked at it. "It'll heal faster," he said. Lyria took it, opened it, smelled it. "Arnica." He paused. "You know your herbs?" She nodded. "More than I know most people." "Good." That was all he said. That evening, he watched her patch the sagging fence post at the south end of the pasture without being asked. She worked like someone who knew labor intimately, who welcomed it, as if effort, not ease, was her sanctuary. The boy watched her too. From the hayloft, from the corner of the porch, from the edge of memory. It was on the fifth day the first shadow returned. The town sent a rider, Sheriff Needon, thin as barbed wire, and twice as stubborn. He dismounted at Calder's gate with a deputy in tow. "Bram," he called, tipping his hat. Calder met him halfway, his revolver visible on his hip, not drawn, but present. "Sheriff, heard you brought a witch out here. Heard wrong. You sayin' she's not dangerous? I'm sayin' she's workin'. Same as any hired hand." Needon eyed the barn, then the field where Lyria bent over a row of sickly corn. "Town's nervous. Woman-like." Her ... word spreads. Calder didn't blink. "They forget the kind of man I am?" The sheriff smiled, though it held no warmth. "No, that's the problem. They remember." "Then let 'em remember this too," Calder said, voice low. "I bought her fair. She's under my roof now. That makes her mine to answer for." The deputy, a boy not yet out of his second beard, muttered, "Still smells like witch to me." Calder's eyes turned glacial. "You got more to say?" The deputy didn single quotes T. They rode off. Lyria hadn't looked up once, but that night Calder found a pouch of herbs hung over the door. Protection. Quiet. Not her first ... and he left it there. The next week brought rain. The dry ground sucked it in like parched skin. The corn perked. The dust settled inside the house. Calder found the boy humming. Not talking, but humming. And Lyria? She was stitching the boy's coat. The one Calder hadn't touched since his wife died. "Didn't ask you to do that," he said. Lyria didn't pause her needle, didn't ask permission. And Calder, for once, didn't mind. That night, the wind brought howls. Coyotes. But mixed within them, Calder heard something else, harsher, heavier. Men. He rose from bed, rifle in hand. Lyria met him at the door. "Two riders," she said before he could open it. "Smelled of horses, sweat, and fear. One wears spurs too loose. The other has a cough he tries to muffle." Calder looked at her. "You saw them?" "I heard them." He believed her. He stepped outside. Who's out there? No answer. Then a voice. We want the witch. He didn't ask who, didn't need to. Hatred never bothered with introductions. She ain't yours to take. The silence that followed was broken only by the metallic click of rifles in the dark. He didn't flinch. Then another sound. To his right. Holding a lantern. She lifted it, revealing not fear but defiance in her eyes. I'm here, she said to the night. Come see what your fear is made of. They didn't. They rode off. In the morning, Calder found the fence cut. Livestock scattered. Vengeance never slept, but neither did Lyria. She was already tending a wounded goat with hands both firm and gentle. He watched her, watched the way she calmed the boy when he found his favorite sheep missing, watched the way she sewed by lantern light when he came in late from the fields, watched the way her silence filled the house like music. And Calder Bram, for the first time in years, felt the beginning of something he thought was lost. Hope. The boy spoke on the 13th day. Lyria was singing a low, mournful tune from a place no map would claim. She didn't realize she sang it aloud. Didn't notice the way the notes crept through the house, curling into corners long silenced. Mama used to sing that. The voice was small, fragile. Lyria froze. Turned. Bram Jr. stood at the threshold, barefoot, eyes wide. His lip trembled. Lyria knelt. She must have known where it came from then. She said it was for healing. Lyria smiled. Not big, not soft, but true. She was right. Calder heard it all from the porch. And wept. Silently. Like men who've forgotten how to grieve. By the time the harvest came, the town had stopped asking about the witch, because she wasn't. She was the woman who brought Calder Bram's boy back to words. The woman who taught the midwife how to stop fevers. The woman who didn't flinch when dogs snarled or men lied. And when a fever swept through the North End, taking 3 children in 2 nights, it was Lyria who stepped in. Who brewed the teas, who cooled the heads, who spoke soft prayers in a tongue no one knew but everyone felt. She never asked for thanks, never charged a coin. She simply worked, and the town began to change. One night, after Bram had gone to sleep and the wind howled with a promise of frost, Calder poured 2 cups of coffee. Sat across from her. You're not what they said. She looked up. Neither are you. They think I bought you. You did. But you stayed. Lyria sipped. That was my choice. Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable. Not empty. Just waiting. Why? He finally asked. She didn't answer right away. Then because this house. Her voice faltered. This house has ghosts. But they don't scream. They whisper. Calder didn't speak. And because the boy needed someone who sees him, and you. She paused again. You needed someone who doesn't. That confused him. Someone who doesn't what? Who doesn't see what you're pretending to be. Only what you are. She stood. Walked to the door. Opened it. The wind cut through like a blade. She turned. And what I am is tired, she said softly. He couldn't argue. She closed the door gently behind her, and he sat there, staring at both cups of coffee. One half drunk, other still full, but both warm. And that night, Calder Bram dreamed of rosemary, of hands that mended, and of a voice that had no need to raise itself to be heard. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. The frost came early. First, it bit the wind, making it sharper, thinner, the kind of cold that slipped under collars and clung to ribs like regret. Then it took the ground, coiling around the roots of the corn and the toes of boots left too long outside. By the end of the week, the color was gone from the trees, and Calder Bram's ranch stood like a lone breath in a world of silence. Lyria felt it coming before the clouds darkened. She began drying herbs faster, sewing thicker cloaks for the boy, and adding ash bark to the firewood pile. Storm's coming, she said one morning without turning from the kindling. Calder looked to the horizon. Weatherman now? She didn't smile. The kind that listens. He didn't argue. That day, the boy fell sick. It started with a cough. Nothing more. Then came the fever, fast and cruel. By dusk, Bram Jr.'s skin was hot enough to warm the blanket around him. His lips split from dryness. His breathing hitched like a wagon stuck in a rut. Calder paced the kitchen like a caged wolf. Should I ride for Doc Crenshaw? Too far, Lyria said, already steeping a bowl of chamomile and horehound. He wouldn't reach us before the fever peaks. Then what do we do? Her hands worked faster than her words. We hold him through it. We don't let him go. That night, Calder watched her fight death without drawing a weapon. She fed the boy spoonfuls of warm honey water. She burned lavender and crushed elderberry leaves beneath his pillow. She spoke words Calder didn't recognize. Words older than any hymn, not loud, not commanding. Just steady. Like a heartbeat. She held the boy through the shaking. Swapped linen soaked in sweat. Kept the fire hot enough to chase away the worst. Calder couldn't sleep. Could barely breathe. At one point, just before dawn, when Bram Jr.'s eyes fluttered open and his breathing evened out, Calder nearly wept. He found himself in the hallway, fists pressed to the wall like they might hold him up. Lyria emerged, her braids soaked in sweat, her eyes red-rimmed. He'll be weak, but he's through the worst. Calder looked at her as if seeing her again for the first time. How? She shook her head. Because I remember what it was like to fight alone. And I won't let another child do it. The frost deepened. With Bram Jr. recovering, Lyria split her time between cooking, harvesting the last of the root cellar, and teaching Calder how to read signs in the wind. The birds moved east. That means snow in less than 3 days, she said one morning while patching a hole in the stable wall. Calder raised an eyebrow. That why you packed the saddlebag yesterday? She nodded. And why I told you to put the hay on the barn roof, not in the corner. Keeps it from molding. You gonna run this place by spring? Lyria didn't answer. Just continued sewing. Calder watched her a long time. He didn't know when it had happened, but he'd stopped seeing her as something he owned. Somewhere between her nursing his son and fixing the irrigation channel after the first freeze, she'd become something else entirely. An equal. Maybe more. In town, the gossip shifted. She cured the Wilmer baby. Heard she got the Barnes twins through fever with just 2 herbs and a prayer. Woman knows things, not dark things, useful things. Even Sheriff Needon, though he never said it outright, began to tip his hat instead of eyeing his holster every time Calder rode in for supplies. But not all the town had softened. Pastor Hiram wasn't blind to whispers. He watched his congregation shrink as folks visited Lyria for remedies instead of his sermons. He spoke from the pulpit with fire. Witchcraft wears many skins. Sometimes it's kindness, sometimes it's healing. But make no mistake, it separates man from the word like rot from wood. Still, Calder noticed that even Hiram's wife came by to ask for a salve for her knees. Lyria gave it freely and didn't charge a word. December brought snow. Heavy, relentless, the kind that sank roofs and silenced wolves. Calder and Lyria worked side by side to brace the house, to dig out the barn door each morning. The boy ran from room to room with energy that seemed to bounce off the walls. You think spring will come early? Calder asked one evening as they thawed their boots by the stove. Lyria was cleaning a deer hide. Nothing comes early, not even mercy. Calder didn't press her. Trouble returned in February. 3 riders, not from town, strangers, with no brand on their horses and no welcome in their eyes. They came to the gate near dusk, just as Calder was fixing the pulley on the well. We're looking for a girl, the lead said. Name's Lyria. Calder's hand didn't stray to his rifle, but his stance changed. Ain't no girl here. We've got a warrant. You gotta lie. They didn't deny it. She took something that didn't belong to her. We're taking it back. All I see are 3 men on worn horses. Didn't say you could trespass. One of the riders spat. You gonna stop us, old man? That word old hit differently when it was spoken by someone who didn't understand what old meant. Old was watching your wife die with your son in her arms. Old was digging graves and planting hope in the same soil. Old was learning to find peace beside a fire with a woman you never meant to love. Calder didn't move. Just said, I buried worse men than you in colder ground. You want her? Come through me. They didn't. They left, but not before promising they'd be back. You won't always be awake, Bram. Neither will you, he said. The next week passed in dread. Liria tightened the shutters. The boy kept to the house. Calder cleaned his guns, but he didn't load them. Not yet. He hadn't told Lyria she was free to leave. She hadn't asked. Who were they? He asked one night by the fire. She stared into the flames. Ghosts. You steal something? She nodded. A name. Calder waited. Lyria's not yours? She looked at him. It is now. He didn't press her, but that night, he put a second shotgun under the bed and locked the barn. When they came back, it was during a blizzard. 3 more men. 6 total. One with a scar that ran ear to lip. One with eyes too pale to be trusted. One with a laugh like broken glass. Calder met them at the gate. This time, he didn't speak. Just stood, rifle in hand. They approached slowly, like jackals unsure if the deer is still alive. She's ours, Bram. Calder didn't blink. Not anymore. You think she told you the truth? You think witches change skin just because you feed them beans and give them a bed? He didn't answer because he didn't need to. A shape stepped from behind him. Lyria in her hand. A single stone, etched, painted, marked with symbols no one had seen in generations. You ride here again, she said, voice calm as snowfall, and your horses won't find their way home. One man scoffed. Magic? Intention. You threatening us, girl? She looked at him. No. Then she threw the stone. It landed with a thud in the snow. A wind gusted. A wind that should not have. The men reared back. Even their horses resisted. Then came a sound from the barn. Howling. Coyote. Not Wolf. Something else. It was Bram Jr. And he wasn't afraid. He stood on the barn roof, drumming a shovel against the metal vent, echoing through the hills like a war cry. And for some reason, it worked. The men turned. Rode off. And this time, they didn't look back. Calder didn't ask what was in the stone. Lyria didn't offer. But that night, when the snow pressed against the window like the hand of some old ghost, Calder reached out, touched her fingers. She didn't pull away. And in the silence that followed, something shifted. Not a word passed between them, but it didn't need to, because finally, in that little house with storm outside and warmth within, 2 people who'd forgotten what it meant to want began to remember, not with fire, but with stillness. With presence. And with the kind of silence that heals more than sound ever could. Winter broke like a fever. First in the sky, where clouds lightened from iron to silver, then in the ground, where snow softened underfoot, sinking into the thirsty earth. Birds returned, low and cautious. Streams cracked through their icy skin and flowed again. Calder Bram stood at the edge of his porch and listened to the thaw. It sounded like forgiveness. Behind him, Lyria was stitching the hem of Bram Jr.'s coat. The boy sat beside her, legs swinging from the bench, asking questions now. Always questions. Why do spiders live in the barn and not the house? Why does fire crackle like it's laughing? Will the snow ever come back to talk to us? Lyria answered. Everyone like each was a prayer. And Calder, leaning against the railing with a coffee he hadn't asked her to make, realized this was the first spring since his wife died where he hadn't dreaded the quiet. He watched Lyria. The wind tugged a strand of her hair loose. The boy giggled when she chased it. She was no longer just a presence in his house. She was the pulse. And that scared him more than any blizzard. He found the courage to speak. 3 days later, you could go, you know. She didn't look up from the seeds she was sorting. I know. Spring's here. Roads are passable. You could be anywhere. And yet, I'm here. He paused. Then, why? She held a seed to the light. Because I chose this soil. He didn't understand, not then. But he would. Word came by courier on a stormy Thursday. A letter. Unmarked. Sheriff Needham brought it himself, though he looked like he'd rather hold. Live snake. Came down from Carson. Territorial governor's seal. He handed it to Calder but didn't leave. Calder broke the wax and read. Then again, and again. Lyria stood across the room. Still and unreadable. Well? Needham asked. Calder set the letter on the table. They're offering a pardon, Lyria blinked. For what? Needham coughed. Witchcraft, theft, fraud. Calder raised a brow. She was never charged. Doesn't matter. The governor wants her on the books. Says if she signs a confession, he'll clear it all. Make her free. Lyria approached slowly. She read the letter without touching it. They want me named, tracked, owned by Inc. Needham shifted. It's a formality. It's a leash. It's a way out. I already have one, she said, eyes flicking toward the boy, who watched from the stairs. Wide-eyed. Calder stepped in then. She doesn't need permission to be free. She earned it. Needham didn't argue. Just tipped his hat and left. The letter sat on the table all night. In the morning, it was gone. No one mentioned it. Spring came hard and fast. Fields swelled with green. The fences held. The roof leaked once, but Lyria patched it with her usual precision. The boy took to feeding the chickens without being asked. One night, Calder found him in the barn, talking to the mare. Papa used to talk to her when Mama was sick. Says horses carry secrets better than people. Calder swallowed something thick. You talk to her now? The boy nodded. She said she likes the quiet better now. Says the ghosts don't scream anymore. Lyria stepped into the doorway then. They whisper. What do they say? The boy asked. Lyria paused. That this house is healing. Then came the fire. Mid-June. Dry season. Lightning strike, most likely. The eastern ridge lit up orange one night, like God had touched a match. Calder, Lyria, and the boy fought to wet the field lines. Threw water till their arms ached. Watched the smoke chew through trees, but skirt the ranch. By dawn, the fire had moved on. The house stood. But the barn, SMODERED. The chickens were gone. The feed burned. Calder sat on a stump with ash in his beard. Lyria approached, a jug of water in hand. He didn't take it. Should have fixed the damn lightning rod. Then you'd be dead instead of the barn. I can rebuild. She knelt. He looked at her. The ash on her cheeks, the burns on her sleeves. You don't have to stay through this. You keep saying that. Because I don't want to trap you. Then stop opening the door. He blinked. I chose this soil, she said again. And for the first time. He understood. They rebuilt the barn together. The boy hammered nails with more noise than skill. Calder cut beams. Lyria soaked wood with linseed and prayers. Every time she brushed past him, he caught her scent, lavender and smoke. He thought he could go the rest of his life inhaling only that, and be content. They shared a bed now. Not at first, not out of obligation, but because one night, when the wind blew so hard it rattled the window panes, she crawled in beside him and said nothing. And in the morning, he made her coffee. That was how it started. Summer wore on. Crops flourished. The boy laughed more. One afternoon, Lyria caught him playing with another boy from town. They took turns making up stories. Dragons and talking rivers. The town no longer called her witch. They called her healer. Midwife. Lady Bram. Trouble returned in August. One of the men who had come hunting her rode into town alone. He was wounded. Bad, collapsed in front of the general. Store, mumbled her name. Lyria and Calder arrived by wagon. Needham called them both. He was shot, multiple times, bleeding out. Lyria examined the man, then whispered dot, then stitched dot he lived. 3 days later, he opened his eyes. We were wrong, he croaked. They lied to us. Who did? Calder asked. A man named Squire. He wanted her, said she held something ancient, said she'd stolen power. Lyria stood silent. Calder asked, Did you? She didn't answer, but her eyes said, Everything dot, yes dot, but not the way they thought. The man stayed in town, didn't ride out again. He became a fixture in the church, then in the school. Built a bench outside the mercantile dot, and every time someone asked him about Lyria, he said, She saved me. That's all I need to know. By autumn, the ranch had changed dot, so had the man who owned it, dot, so had the woman who saved it, and the boy dot dot he didn't just talk, he sang. He read books aloud. He painted with crushed berries. He learned to rope cattle and shoe horses and bake bread. One night, Calder stood watching him sleep. Lyria joined him. Do you think he remembers? She asked. Not like we do. Maybe that's mercy. Maybe it's healing. She took his hand. He squeezed it. You never told me why you ran. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Because I knew one day I'd stop, and I wanted it to be somewhere worth it. Calder nodded. It is. Outside, the first leaves began to fall dot, and inside, for the first time in a decade, a home breathed dot, alive dot, whole dot, and free. Autumn ran quiet over the Bram Ranch, and quiet was a language they now all spoke fluently. The fields, cleared of their final harvest, shimmered in the long gold light. Geese passed overhead in ragged V's. The boy chased their shadows across the pasture while Calder repaired the gate he kept meaning to fix all summer. Lyria prepared for winter, not with dread, but with rhythm-preserving jars, packing herbs, double sewing seams dot. There was a kind of peace in that house now. A peace that felt earned dot, and maybe too good to last dot. The letter came from the capital dot again dot. This one didn't arrive by sheriff. It was carried by a man in a white coat with a gold seal on his chest. An emissary, or so he claimed. He introduced himself at the gate. Dr. Elias Marrow, sent under the authority of Governor Tristan. I request audience with Lyria Bram. Calder didn't correct him. He led the man to the house. Lyria opened the door before they knocked. What do you want? She asked without preamble. Dr. Marrow looked uneasy. We require your knowledge. For what purpose? A fever in the South Territories. It resists quinine and laudanum. They say you saved 5 during the burning season without losing one. Lyria was silent. We offer transport, he continued. Payment. Protection. From whom? Themselves, Calder said quietly. Dr. Marrow stiffened. We only wish to request her expertise. The capital would treat her as honored. Lyria finally spoke. And when I want to leave? The man faltered. She nodded. That's what I thought. She shut the door. That night, Calder sat with her on the porch. If you wanted to go, I wouldn't stop you, I know, but peace, she whispered, isn't something you find in a place. It's something you build inside people. Calder turned that over in his mind. They won't stop. Then we make this place louder, so peace drowns them out. He took her hand. Held it. Let's start tomorrow. The very next morning, Lyria began teaching, not just Bram Jr., but anyone who came. She set up an awning beside the barn, hung herbs in careful clusters, labeled jars with neat chalk, and folks came. They came from town, from across the ridge, from the far end of Whistler's Canyon. They brought their babies, their rashes, their questions. She taught them to boil water, to trust willow bark, to mix lavender with honey for sleep. She didn't charge. She listened. She taught patience, observation, Courage. Calder built benches. Bram read from the dictionary, sounding out each new root. They called it the porch school. It became a ritual. Evenings were for firelight and quiet stories. Calder told none from his past, but all from the land. The boy made up the rest. And the ghosts? They stopped pacing. They started sitting. Until December. Until the emissary came back. But not alone. 4 riders. Uniformed. Armed. This time, they didn't ask. The governor has issued a formal summons, Dr. Marrow said, reading from a scroll. Lyria Bram is to be escorted to the capital immediately for her knowledge and service to the realm. Calder's hand found his rifle. She's not a soldier. She's not yours to keep. She's not yours to take. Marrow unfolded a second paper. Signed. By 3 judges. A warrant. This is coercion, Lyria said. This is law, the doctor replied. Then your law is blind. She didn't resist, didn't cry, just packed her herbs, kissed the boy's forehead, and whispered something in his ear that made his face go pale. Then she left. Calder watched. Her wagon disappear down the ridge. Then he went inside, shut the door, and said nothing for 2 days. On the 3rd day, the boy asked, "What did she say to me?" Calder looked up. "You mean when she left?" The boy nodded. I forgot, but I feel it. Like a picture in the back of my head." Calder frowned. "Try to draw it." They sat at the kitchen table. Bram sketched in charcoal. An eye. A sun. A compass. Calder stared. That's her trail mark." "Trail mark?" "She used to leave them when she walked out into the woods. To find her way back. Then she wants us to follow." Calder blinked. "Us?" The boy met his eyes. "She's not ours to keep. But we are hers." They packed that night. Left the ranch under the care of Walt Jenkins, the old man who never stopped showing up at the porch school. "Bring her back, Bram," Walt said. "This place ain't the same without her hum in the windows." Calder nodded. They rode out at first light. The trail led south, into cold valleys, past dead rivers. Into towns where fear smelled like tobacco and rot. Everywhere. The fever. It clung to windows. It sang in coughs. It whispered from alleyways. But Calder asked every inn, every gatekeeper, "Have you seen a woman with a braid and a silence too big for her frame?" Sometimes they said yes. Sometimes they said nothing. And sometimes they gave him signs, symbols on barn walls, chalk circles on hitching posts. Each one pointed farther south. Until finally they reached the capital. The capital stank of sickness. Marrow met them at the gate. His coat was stained, his eyes hollow. "You shouldn't be here." "She is. She asked not to see you." Calder dismounted. "She doesn't get to make that call, not alone." Marrow didn't argue. He led them through alleys to a long hall turned into a ward. Cots lined the walls. Children moaned. Men turned blue around the lips. And at the center of it, moving like a flame across dry brush, was Lyria. She didn't notice them at first. She was too busy crushing leaves, measuring oils, holding a girl's hand. When she did look up, her face broke, not into tears, not into joy, but into a silence so complete it stunned the room. She crossed to them, touched Bram's cheek. He grinned. "I remembered the sun." Then she looked at Calder. He said nothing, just took her hand. "Let's finish this." Together, they healed. Not with potions. With knowledge. With hours. With fire and broth and belief. Bram helped boil linens. Calder carried by. Autumn ran quiet over the Bram ranch. And quiet was a language they now all spoke fluently. The fields, cleared of their final harvest, shimmered in the long gold light. Geese passed overhead in ragged V's. The boy chased their shadows across the pasture while Calder repaired the gate he kept meaning to fix all summer. Lyria prepared for winter, not with dread, but with rhythm-preserving jars, packing herbs, double sewing seams. There was a kind of peace in that house now. A peace that felt earned. And maybe, Too good to last. The letter came from the capital. Again. This one didn't arrive by sheriff. It was carried by a man in a white coat with a gold seal on his chest. An emissary, or so he claimed. He introduced himself at the gate. Dr. Elias Marrow, sent under the authority of Governor Tristan. I request audience with Lyria Bram. Calder didn't correct him. He led the man to the house. Lyria opened the door before they knocked. What do you want? She asked without preamble. Dr. Marrow looked uneasy. We require your knowledge. For what purpose? A fever in the South Territories. It resists quinine and laudanum. They say you saved 5 during the burning season without losing one. Lyria was silent. We offer transport, he continued. Payment. Protection. From whom? Themselves, Calder's. The story did not end with peace. It deepened with it. Because peace, Lyria soon learned, is not stillness. It is the pulse under a calm hand. It is the silence between storm and next breath. And at the Bram Ranch, it was the rhythm of life continuing. Without waiting for permission. By the following spring, the orchard began to bloom again. It had been left for dead 3 seasons ago. A patch of stubborn trees that bore no fruit and offered no shade. But Lyria walked among them one afternoon. With Bram Jr., now grown an inch taller and 2 shades louder, and she told him something strange. Speak to them. He blinked. Trees don't talk. Not out loud, she said. But they remember voices, and the ones who used to love them. So the boy spoke every day. Stories, jokes, even bad singing. And when the flowers came, they came like an apology for forgetting. Calder didn't talk about the fever anymore. He didn't talk about the past at all, but Lyria noticed the small ways it haunted him. The way he counted steps walking into town. The way he watched the sky when the wind shifted. The way his hand always brushed the empty loop of his holster, like a muscle memory too old to die. One night, she found him in the barn, staring at the saddle he'd once used to ride into the capital. Dust had settled over it like a second skin. You planning a trip? She asked. He looked at her, startled. No, just remembering. She walked up beside him. Does it hurt? Not as much as forgetting did. She nodded. Then gently, we could go, if you needed. He smiled. I already did. And I came back. That matters more. The ranch began to grow, not just in crops, but in people. Families came from farther away now, some looking for healing. Some just looking for a place where things made sense. Calder turned the old bunkhouse into a schoolhouse. Lyria added a drying shed for herbs. Bram Jr. helped build a windmill with 2 boys from a family who had survived the plague. One of them had no parents anymore. The other never spoke, but they worked. They stayed. They laughed. And the ranch became something more than land. It became a memory in the making. Then one night, while the stars stretched wide and endless over the darkened ridge, the boy came to Calder with a question. Were you afraid of her when she came in chains? Calder didn't answer at first. He reached for a match, lit the lamp on the porch, and watched moths dance around the glow. Yes. Why? Because she looked like someone who'd survived something I hadn't. The boy frowned. That doesn't make sense. It does when you've lived long enough. But you saved her. No, Calder said. She walked here on her own. All I did was open the gate. In the 2nd year after her arrival, Lyria was asked to speak at the county gathering. The same townsfolk who once called her a witch now asked for her words. To bless the planting season. She stood on the steps of the old courthouse, bare feet. In the spring dust, braid tied with a ribbon the boy had woven from grass. She looked out over the crowd and said only this: plant deep. But not just in soil, in each other, in every kindness. In every moment you don't rush through. If you want a good harvest, tend the people first. Then she stepped down. And no one said a word against her again. Trouble came back, as it always does. A banker from the south brought papers one day. claimed the land had never been properly deeded to the Bram family, claimed interest, claimed legal loopholes. He came with a bailiff and a gold ring, glinting on a soft hand. "I don't make the rules," he said. Calder invited him inside. Sat him down, served him coffee. Lyria stood by the stove. "Do you know what this house is built on?" she asked the banker. He blinked. "Foundation?" "No," she said. "Sacrifice. And silence. And forgiveness." He laughed, nervous. "That doesn't hold up in court." Calder leaned forward. "Then don't bring it to court. Bring it to memory." And with that, the boy walked in, carrying a ledger, the one his mother had kept, the one with every name, every crop yield, every transaction back to the first harvest. They laid it on the table. The banker left. The deed was never questioned again. In the third year, a storm came. Not the kind that breaks trees. The kind that brings lightning with a memory. It struck the hill above the orchard. Set a pine ablaze. The fire spread fast, wind behind it, hunger inside it. But this time they were ready. Not just Calder and Lyria, the whole town. They came with buckets, with blankets, with songs. They sang as they stomped the fire down. They sang as they broke it, and when it was out, the orchard still stood. Not one tree lost. Years passed. The boy grew tall. The porch grew wide. Lyria aged, but never slowed. She taught a generation of girls how to read the wind, taught a generation of boys how to speak without shame. Calder grew quieter, but his quiet was not retreat. It was foundation. And when he finally passed, it was with Lyria's hand in his, and the boy reading aloud from a book he once said he hated. He smiled. Once. Then slept. And the house did not mourn with screams. It mourned with bread baked the next morning. With herbs boiled, with children taught, with a porch still swept at dawn. Lyria stayed. She tended. She led. The town didn't just remember her. It reshaped itself in her image. A well dug beside every church, a tree planted outside every home, a silence before every decision. And when she finally lay down years later, hands folded over a braid now streaked with silver, she whispered one thing to Bram. Now a man grown tall as the doorframe. We choose the soil. And if we choose right, it remembers us. He wept, not like a child, like a tree losing its leaves. And when they buried her beside Calder, the whole town came. Each brought one thing, a seed. They planted them in a ring, and the orchard grew wider. Still. So wide it touched the road. In travelers, even those who never knew the names Lyria or Bram, would stop and rest there. And always someone would tell them a story about a woman in chains. And a man with ghosts, and a boy who learned to speak again. And they'd say, "This land remembers them." Then they'd walk on, and the orchard would bloom again. Long after the orchard reached the edge of the road, long after Lyria and Calder were dust beneath the roots, the story refused to die. It lingered. In the footsteps of the children who ran between the apple trees. In the pages of the ledger Bram Jr. kept, its spine cracked and annotated with the kind of care reserved for sacred things. And in the wind that moved across the porch at dusk, as if brushing invisible fingers across the old wood, the ranch never became a monument. It didn't need to. It remained a home, a place where things began, and sometimes where they ended. Bram Jr. never left. He grew into his name the way mountains grow into the sky, slowly, deliberately. He married a schoolteacher named Ellen, whose hands always smelled of chalk and wild rose. She arrived one spring from the north, trying to escape a family that thought silence was safety. But on the ranch she found the kind of noise that healed. Their wedding was held in the orchard. Between the first bloom and the first fruit, the town came barefoot. Lyria's trail mark was etched into every table. The ceremony was short, the feast long. And that night, when the stars were so loud they made the air hush, Ellen told Bram, "Your mother left something in this land. I feel it when I stand barefoot on the porch. He kissed her. Then never wear shoes. They had a daughter, born during the heaviest rain in 7 years. They named her Mara, and Mara, from the moment she could crawl, tried to leave. Not in rebellion. In curiosity. She wandered to the barn, to the ridge. Once to the old well where Lyria had once stood in the middle of a drought and whispered something to the stone that made water come again. Mara didn't know that story. Not yet, but she knew the well was important. She dropped wildflowers into it. Every week. She said the water liked the smell. Mara grew fast. Like spring grass. She asked questions in circles. Why do ghosts whisper? Can songs live in trees? Why does Grandpa's book have a heart drawn on page 47? Bram didn't always know how to answer, but Ellen did. And sometimes the land did too. One morning Mara asked, "Is it true a witch used to live here?" Bram stiffened. "Who told you that?" "Mrs. Redley at the bakery. She said the orchard grew because of a witch." Bram took a deep breath. "Your grandmother wasn't a witch. She was a healer." "Same thing," Mara said. And skipped away. The town changed again. Electricity came, slowly. A line ran past the ranch but stopped short of touching it. Bram refused it. Some things are better in candlelight. He installed it at the schoolhouse, the barn, the infirmary, but the house stayed lit by flame and sun. The townsfolk called him old-fashioned. They didn't know that in his bedroom drawer was a letter Lyria had written him when she first taught him to brew willow bark tea. Trust slow things. He read it every winter. Mara grew into a young woman with eyes too bright and hands always stained from something berries, ink, grease. She fixed the windmill at 13. Tamed a wild pony by 14. And at 15, she told Bram, "I wanna see where she walked." "Who?" "Lyria. I want to follow the trail she left." Bram didn't answer for a long time. Then he stood, took a shovel, and walked to the old oak behind the barn. There, under stone and loam, was a wooden box sealed with wax. He opened it. Inside, trail marks, painted in oils on cedar squares, a journal, a bag of dried rosemary. And a note. Written in Lyria's hand. "For the one who hears the ghosts again." He gave it all to Mara. She cried, then packed a bag. She left it first, light, wore boots only to the edge of the orchard, then barefoot. To feel what she felt, she said. Bram watched her go with a heart half bursting and half breaking. Ellen wept openly, but neither stopped. Her. Because they knew better. You don't keep those born to walk, you bless them. Mara followed the trail marks, each one left on stone. Tree, gatepost, some were faded, some looked freshly drawn. Though that couldn't be, unless time worked different for those who listened. She walked for months. Valleys where shadows lingered too long. Through towns where people stared too hard. She never felt afraid. She felt watched, but kindly. Like the land was waiting for her to remember something she hadn't been told yet. In a southern valley, she found the old fever ward, boarded up, swallowed by ivy, but the floor still creaked the same. She stepped inside and heard it. Laughter. Soft, distant. She followed it. To the corner where once Lyria had sat with a dying child and willed the fever to break. Mara knelt. Placed rosemary on the cracked tile. And whispered, "I remember you." The wind shifted, and for a heartbeat, the ivy peeled back from the window. Let in light. Mara kept walking. She reached the Capitol. People there remembered the story. "You her granddaughter?" "I don't know. Looks like you." She stayed one night, then walked on. Until she reached the sea. And there, on a cliff, she built a cairn. Laid all the trail marks in a circle around it. Wrote one word on a stone and placed it at the top. Home. Then turned around. And walked back. When she returned to the orchard, Bram was older. Ellen's hair had silvered. The ranch had changed. There was a new schoolhouse, a second well. 2 dozen new trees, and a small girl who ran out from the porch. and stared at Mara like she was a ghost turned real. Mama said you were just a story, Mara knelt. So was your great-grandmother, the girl blinked. Is she still? Mara smiled. No, she's soil. And stories, and song. The girl nodded. Then took Mara's hand. Led her into the house. And that night, Mara slept in the room where Lyria had first rested after arriving in chains. But now, it smelled of rosemary and ink, and it felt like rest. Years passed again, and the orchard never stopped blooming. And people never stopped coming. And the story never stopped growing. Because someone always remembered. Always whispered. Always taught their children. When the world goes quiet, listen. It means the soil is waiting to bloom again. And that story. It never ends. Mara stayed, not because her feet grew tired, but because her heart found something it didn't know it was missing until it stood in the kitchen stirring stew with her mother and watching the girl who shared her freckles make faces in the window. Glass, her time on the trail didn't fade. It rooted itself inside her like a second heartbeat, steady and ancient. But home had changed while she was gone. And maybe she had too. She started wearing boots again. Sometimes she planted a cedar just behind the barn, beside the oak that hid Lyria's trail box. When she did, she said nothing. But she buried a coin from the capital at its roots, and a pinch of rosemary from the cliff's. Just in case the tree ever needed to remember. Her niece, Lainey, was 6, small, sharp, bright as the stars that used to guide Mara home. She followed Mara everywhere. Why do you always smell like the road? Because I listened to it. What does it say? Mara would pause, sniff the air like she wasn't sure. Depends on where you're going. And Lainey would giggle, then try to repeat every word. The ranch was busier. Now. No longer just a home. It had become a place of memory. Families came from far towns to stay a season, to learn the old ways, to kneel in the dirt beside Bram and hear him say, "This is how Lyria taught me." They didn't call her a witch anymore. They called her the first listener. Mara thought it was too grand, but she never said so. Because every time someone said the name, a seed seemed to stir in the ground. Ellen passed one soft autumn morning. No drama. No cry. Just a stillness in her favorite chair. A breeze lifting the curtain, and the faintest smell of wild rose. They buried her beside, called her an Lyria. Mara planted chamomile. Lainey cried, then asked to be the one to sweep the porch every morning. That winter, something odd happened. A stranger arrived, not by horse. Not by wagon, but walking, with a limp. And no hat. And a scar down his jaw like a knife. Tried to remember him. Mara saw him first. She was returning from the orchard with twine and pear skins. He stood at the edge of the property, just before the cedar line, looking at the house like it was both his and not. You lost? She asked. He shook his head. I think I'm found. That was not the answer she expected. She offered bread anyway. His name was Jonas, or that's what he said. He didn't speak of his past, only that he used to be someone no one should remember. He asked to stay in the shed, work the fields without prompting, repaired a broken axle like he'd been born, with a wrench in his palm. Lainey liked him. Mara did not because she distrusted him, because she recognized him, the way he flinched when owls called, the way he turned his back to fire, the way his eyes looked like maps no longer in use. He was a ghost still walking, and she didn't like that he reminded her of herself. Then one night, a scream, not from the orchard, from the porch. Lanie. Mara ran, lantern in hand. Found the girl standing beside the old rocking chair, trembling. What is it? Someone. Was sitting there. But they disappeared. Mara knelt. Was it a ghost? Lainey shook her head. No. She looked like you, but older, and burning. Mara went still. What did she say? She said, "Don't let the silence grow teeth." Jonas watched from the doorway. Said nothing. But that night, Mara heard him crying in the shed. The next morning, She brewed tea, walked to him. Sat without invitation. She meant you. He looked up. Red eyes. What? The ghost. She meant you. He didn't deny it. I used to do things before the fever, before the quiet. I thought forgetting them made them disappear. It doesn't. I know that now. Mara poured tea into his cup. Then stop trying to forget. Start remembering in the right direction. Jonas stayed. He helped build a second barn. He taught Lainey how to sharpen a scythe. He never spoke of his past. Again, but he planted a row of marigolds beside Lyria's grave. And sometimes, Mara caught him whispering there, like a confession with no priest. Spring came. The town brought children to the ranch. Not just for school, but for stories. Mara stood on the porch. Told tales of the trail, of the fever, of the cedar marks, of Lyria in chains. And called her with ghosts. And Bram, Jr., who chose the soil. She never claimed they were true, but the orchard believed them. And so did the children. On the anniversary of Lyria's arrival, the town held a silent hour. No bells. No wagons. No trade. Just breath. And birds. And the rustle of leaves. It became a tradition. Mara called it the listening. Because if you can't hear the quiet, she said, you'll never know what it's saying. Lainey rolled her eyes, but she listened. The orchard gave fruit that year. No one had planted a wild apple with red flesh and golden seeds. They named it First Fire. Sweet, tart, tough skin, just like Liria. Just like Mara. Just like the land. And when a reporter from the capital came, pen sharp and eyes narrow, asking for stories to turn into books, Mara said only this: tell them the soil remembers. Tell them we listen. Tell them the orchard still blooms. And then put down your pen and plant something. He didn't, but he stayed the night, and when he left, he took a cutting of First Fire with him. Mara never asked if it grew. Some stories aren't for export. Late one summer, Jonas left. No goodbye. Just a note. The silence stopped biting. Time to find where it started barking. He left his boots behind. Lainey wore them like relics. Mara aged, not fast, not slow. Like cedar, like stone, like story. She grew into the land the way rain does, soft, steady, expected. And when she finally sat in the rocking chair for the last time, eyes closed, heart steady, Lainey found her there before dawn. She wasn't sad. Just still. In her lap, a new trail mark. Fresh paint. Cedar Square. One word: north. They buried her beside the cedar she planted, and the orchard grew another row. Stories end, but the land keeps telling them. And somewhere a girl hears a voice in the wind say, don't let the silence grow teeth. And she starts walking. Barefoot. And the trail begins again. More stories bloom from here. Subscribe and follow. The orchard isn't done speaking. They didn't mark time by years anymore. They marked it by bloom cycles, by how many seasons the first fire bore fruit, by how many times the porch had to be rebuilt after winter storms, by how long since Mara's last trail mark. Lainey was no longer a child. She'd grown into her own weight and shadow, and people had stopped calling her the girl with Mara's laugh. Now they said she had her own way of seeing the world, quieter, sharper, like someone always listening for the unspoken. She taught at the schoolhouse now, not out of duty, but because one spring a child asked her why the clouds came closer when it rained, and she realized the world had gotten too quiet without questions. So she taught, and she told stories. She didn't call them that, of course. She called them ancestral weather. Sod thunder was the land remembering a voice, that lightning was old grief striking out, that the orchard only grew for those who sang to it or listened in the still dark. The children believed her, especially the ones who'd been hurt elsewhere. They always did. The porch still creaked, the cedar still stood. And on the anniversary of Mara's passing, Lainey planted a new row of rosemary at its base. Not for her aunt, not exactly, but for the silence Mara had taught her to love, the one between breaths, The one that reminded you the world was still listening. Then came the storm. Not the kind that knocks down trees. The kind that rides in on rumor and ink. A letter arrived, stamped, sealed, unfamiliar. Crest. From the Dominion of Records in the New Southern Territories. It read, to the occupants of the Bram Estate, our investigations into historic land use and record-keeping have unearthed anomalies that place your property within a contested jurisdiction. Under Article Revision R17, reclassification proceedings will begin. A representative will arrive within the fortnight to assess compliance with regional integration law. Laney read it 3 times. Then took it to the cedar. Read it aloud. Burned. It buried the ashes. And waited. He arrived on the 13th day. Not alone. 3 officials. 2 horses, a ledger machine with copper wiring, and a smile like a map folded. The wrong way. Counselor Ephraim Vaughn, he said. Acting Land Registrar and Legal Arbiter for Transition District 3. Laney didn't offer her name. He didn't wait for it. I understand this property has no formal charter. She tilted her head. It has a memory. He blinked. Made a note. He stayed a week, interviewed elders, measured lines no one else saw, dismissed oral records as non-binding folklore, called the orchard an undeclared economic zone. Then, during supper on the 6th day, he requested to meet. Under the cedar. Laney agreed. She brought no one. He brought a lantern and a recorder. Why here? He asked. Because this is where we listen. I see. Miss Bran, is it? It was. Now it's just Laney. Well, Laney, you understand how jurisdiction works. Documentation, codified ownership, precedent. We understand memory, he sighed. This isn't sustainable. This isn't legal. It is remembered. That doesn't hold up in court. It holds up in storms, he laughed. You people speak in riddles. She stood. No, we speak in soil. If you listened, you'd know the difference. He left, but not before issuing the summons. Court of Land Reallocation, Dominion Authority. Next full moon. The town fell quiet, not scared, just listening. Waiting for the soil to speak. Laney packed her cedar marks, wrote a letter, left it beneath the porch, took first fire, seeds in a pouch. And walked. To the Capitol. To speak. The court was marble and echo. No trees. No birds. Only robes. Only papers. Only the scent of ink. And consequence. They asked her name. She gave her story. Instead, they asked for deeds. She gave them trail marks. They asked for proof. She gave them a handful of first fire seeds and a whisper. Plant them. If they bloom, we stay. If they don't, we'll go. The council deliberated. Laughed. Dismissed her. But the clerk, an old woman with eyes like storms and a cedar brooch on her shawl, took the seeds, planted them behind the courthouse. Weeks passed. Then came a letter. Handwritten. No seal. Just a sentence. They grew. Laney smiled. So did the soil. The orchard widened. The children sang louder. And one night, when the porch light flickered, a breeze carried a voice no one heard, but all remembered. Don't let the silence grow teeth. And Laney whispered back, we won't. The land remains. The orchard blooms. The stories keep walking. And so do those who remember them. Subscribe and walk with us. This land still has things to say. They say when the first fire bloomed in the courthouse garden, 3 clerks wept without knowing why. They say the scent reminded one of her mother, long buried. Another remembered a song she hadn't heard since childhood, and the third, who had never believed in soil or story, stood still for a full hour, then left the city and was never seen again. No one planted anything there. After. The garden became a place of silence, but not the kind that grew teeth. The kind that bloomed. Back on the ranch, Laney carved a new mark. Not cedar. Not stone. This time, she painted it on the side of the old barn. A spiral, made from symbols passed down through every listener. Inside the spiral, a heart. Not drawn but shaped like the curl of an apple leaf. Children touched it when they passed. Some said it warmed in winter. No one doubted them. The orchard grew wilder, more trees, more birds. A fox den beneath the western row. And something else. Something no one planted. At the edge of the property, where the cedar line curled toward the creek, a new tree sprouted. Short at first, unassuming, but it grew fast. And its bark shimmered faintly gold at dawn. When Lainey touched it, she heard her aunt's voice, just a whisper, north. She didn't ignore it, but she didn't leave yet. She waited, because something else was coming. The dreams began that fall. Not nightmares, not visions. Just images. A house without a door, a woman, wrapped in chains, walking into fire and stepping out with wings. A map drawn in ink that moved when you looked away, and always, in the background, the orchard, but older, wilder, different. She woke each time with the taste of rosemary on her tongue. The town noticed. Old families began asking about the listening. Strangers sent letters requesting visits. Someone published a book called The Orchard Doctrine, Soil as Memory. Lainey never read it, but she smiled when she saw the cover. A painted spiral with a leaf at its center. She turned 32, under a harvest moon. That night, the porch filled with every voice the land remembered. Not ghosts. Echoes. Whispers and laughter. Footsteps, where no one walked. The sound of a rocking chair when the wind was still. Lainey stood barefoot in the orchard and listened. Mara. Calder. Liria. All of them. Not speaking. Just. Present. And then a breeze. North. She packed at sunrise. Left a note by the cedar. When the roots grow teeth, follow them. And she walked. Not away. Toward. The land shifted. The trail was older than maps. She passed cairns, made from spiral stones, crossed rivers that whispered her name, slept beneath trees that shed petals even in frost. She wrote nothing down, only listened, until she reached the bluff and saw the valley. It wasn't marked, but she knew it, somewhere in her marrow. This was where the first mark was made. The valley held a village, not large, scattered. Houses, a school, a circle of stones around a well. Children watched her pass. Some waved. Some stared. An old man sitting outside the general store nodded once. "You're late," he said. She smiled. "I came when the land called." He grunted. Then, "You're on time." The village called itself Alder. No signs. No mayor. Just a keeper. Her name was Finna. She wore wool skirts and bone earrings and carried a staff made from 3 types of wood bound by copper. She didn't greet Lainey with words. She held out a bowl. Inside, soil, red. Lainey took a pinch, tasted it. Said, "It remembers." Finna smiled. "You do too." Lainey stayed, learned their ways, their marks, how they listened. They were different. Where? Lainey's people told stories in silence. The Alder folk sang them into pots, into bread, into the way they braided their hair. Their spiral was vertical. Cedar was juniper, but the heart was the same. So was the quiet. Finna taught her the old rhythms. Drums that spoke to root systems, fires that responded diverse, dreams that could be planted like seeds. Lainey taught them trail marks. First fire grafting, listening. Hours. And for the first time in 2 generations, 2 ways of remembering stood side by side. Not arguing. Not competing. Growing. Then Finna grew ill. Said it was time. Asked Lainey to take the staff. Lainey refused at first. "I'm not from here." Finna touched her cheek. Neither was the first fire, but it still bloomed. Lainey led the village under a new name, Echo Keeper. She carved a new spiral, hybrid, horizontal and vertical, placed it in the village circle, and every solstice, she walked barefoot from Alder to the orchard, and back. They say now there's a path between the 2, invisible, but real. And children from each side learn both songs. They say the soil is richer, the wind's kinder, and that sometimes When no one's looking, the spiral on the old barn glows faintly gold. They say it's the orchard saying, keep going. They listen. Keep listening. Keep planting. The orchard still remembers. Subscribe and walk with us. Part 11 is already blooming. Part 11, the root-bound letter. The path between alder and the orchard had grown into more than a tradition. It was a trail in the soil itself now, lined with juniper branches and cedar resin, marked by the footsteps of dozens of children who had walked barefoot through snow and rain, just to reach the listening stone halfway. But one morning, that stone had something beneath it. Not a carving, a letter, wrapped in bark, tied in vine. Lainey received it after the solstice, delivered by a boy, who said the stone had whispered her name. She unfolded it carefully. The words were carved into bark. The southern groves have gone silent. The wind does not return. The listening roots are wounded. Come. No name. No map. But the spiral at the bottom bled. Faint golden ink. Not alders. Not the orchards. Something older. Something forgotten. She went. Part 11. The root-bound letter. The path between alder and the orchard had grown into more than a tradition. It was a trail in the soil itself now, lined with juniper branches and cedar resin, marked by the footsteps of dozens of children who had walked barefoot through snow and rain just to reach the listening stone halfway. But one morning, that stone had something beneath it. Not a carving, a letter wrapped in bark, tied in vine. Lainey received it after the solstice, delivered by a boy, who said the stone had whispered her name. She unfolded it carefully. The words were carved into bark. The southern groves have gone silent. The wind does not return. The listening roots are wounded. Come. No name. No map. But the spiral at the bottom bled faint golden ink. Not alders. Not the orchards. Something older. Something forgotten. She went. Dawn found her at the juniper-cedar border where Lyria's original path bent toward the south. The air was crisp. A silence deeper than any she had known pressed around her, as if the ground itself were holding its breath. The well-houses in alder stood empty, the children sleeping too deeply to stir by the morning wind. Lainey knelt beside the listening stone. It had felt warm in her hands, but now it was cold, as if it had never spoken at all. She placed her palm over its top, feeling the tiny grooves carved by every generation's fingertips. Then she traced the bark letter with her thumb, tasting the faint sweet of sap and vine. "Roots," she murmured. "What do you hide?" No answer, just the soft sigh of the forest waking. She rose and crossed the ridge. The southern groves lay in shadow, their leaves dull where they should have glowed. The orchard behind her seemed to quiver once, as if reaching out, but then settled, accepting her departure. By midday, she reached the old fever ward. Rebuilt after the plague and repurposed as a meeting hall, it stood now forlorn, vines crawling up its brick walls. The windows were shuttered, the door's lock broken. This was where Lyria had once healed, and where Bram Jr. had carried the dying to sanctuaries lit only by fire. Lainey pushed inside. Dust motes danced in the sunbeams that slipped through cracks in the shutters. In the center of the hall lay a great oak table, scarred by age. Upon it, no bodies, no herbs, no portals to healing. Nothing but circles of bare earth imprints, of roots stolen from the floor. She touched the first circle. Its earth was cold and brittle, like ash. The second was dry, pitted. The third, she winced, was gone entirely. All that remained was a crack in the stone that ran deep into the floor. A voice, high and tremulous, broke the silence. "Leave." Lainey turned. A man stood in the doorway, thin, ragged, eyes shining like run-off stars. He looked neither hostile nor afraid, only desperate. "Who are you?" she asked. He swallowed. "I came for the roots. I came when they began to scream." He introduced himself as Corin. He said his people once tended the southern groves. A band of listeners whose song kept the wind awake in every tree. But a blight, some call it sorrow, some call it greed, had reached their lands. Roots had withered, birds had flown away, and the cicadas had not sung in years. The sap dried thicker, he said. The wood cracked. We used our drums. We used our chants. Nothing. Laney studied him. He wore the crest of an ancient spiral carved into a bronze clasp on his belt, one she had never seen before. Golden, burning with a heat she felt in her bones. Where do you come from? Farther south, beyond the ridges your maps have forgotten. We call it the Winterbro. The name felt like frost. Why now? Because the pain has grown teeth. He knelt, pointing at the table's floor. The listening stone cracked open. It bled rootlets that snarled the earth. We tracked them here. This hall once held their ears. Now it is empty, empty and silent. Laney closed her eyes. She could almost hear it, the faint hum of hollow wind trapped in each broken root. She knelt, placing her palm on the floor where the great trunk once lay. I hear them, she whispered. Corin sat beside her. Together, they listened. The hall breathed. The wood under their palms pulsed like a heart. In that moment, Laney understood that healing was not enough. The roots themselves had to remember how to speak again. Show me, she said. He led her through the ruins to a side chamber. There, suspended from a ring of timber, hung a sculpture. Of brambles and vine, a map of root paths, intertwined in impossible loops. At its center lay a crystal the size of a fist, dull and lifeless. This is the heart shear, Corin explained. The core of our listening network. When it dies, the wind forgets how to carry song. Laney reached out. The crystal was cold as bone. She closed her eyes, remembering the taste of rosemary on her tongue, the warmth of the orchard soil beneath her feet. It still remembers, she said. She opened her palm, revealing a handful of first fire seeds. Trust springs, she murmured, placing them around the crystal. Corin blinked. What ... Then we sing. They lit candles in a ring around the sculpture. Corin drummed a slow rhythm on the oak slabs. Laney struck a hollow clay jar for counterbass. She sang the spiral song, a melody passed down from Lyria, reshaped by Mara. Carried here by Laney's footsteps, the notes filled the chamber. The vines writhed. The brambles glowed faint amber. The crystal cracked. Corin's drumbeat faltered. Laney raised her voice, soft and steady. Roots that fail to whisper, remember our song. Return our breath to the wind. The crystal split. Light poured forth, illuminating each root path. The dead. Loops filled with green shock of sap. Corin joined the song in his own tongue. Their voices alternated, one echoing the other, until the chamber became a living labyrinth of sound. A tremor shook the hall. Dust fell from the rafters. The sculpture disintegrated into dust and sprouted a single shoot that pierced the crystals. Remains, Laney and Corin collapsed, breathless in the dawn that followed. They stood amid the ruins. The listening stone lay whole again. The heart-shear shoot reached skyward, delicate and new. We saved them, Corin whispered. Laney knelt, touching the crystal fragments. They thrummed with warmth. She gathered a shard. We saved ourselves. Corin smiled. The orchard called, and you followed. Laney looked east toward Alder, then west toward the orchard. Roots grow teeth at home, she said. Then you follow them farther ... until they find heart. He nodded. Together, they walked back down the ridge. When they reached the orchard, dawn light gilded the branches. The first fire apples of the year hung heavy and red. Bran Jr.'s widow, Ellen's granddaughter, brought them baskets of steaming bread. They tasted the fruit, sweet with salt of earth, tart with promise. Children gathered, listening to the story of the heart-shear's bloom. Laney held the crystal shard aloft. Remember, she told them, roots may break, but song will always find its way. And the orchard answered. A breeze stirred. A spiral of petals drifted downward. As if whispering, continue. More stories sprout from this. Subscribe and stay rooted. Part 12. The orchard sends its daughter. The southern groves had always been more myth than map. Once, they'd been a cradle of songwood and sageroot. Back when every harvest called for a new story and every seed knew its ancestor's name. But for 2 generations, the groves had vanished from memory lost to war, weather, or worse, neglect. The orchard didn't forget them, neither did the land. Laney followed the river south until it changed color. Where once it was copper and cloud, it turned mirror still, reflecting not the sky but the roots below knotted, silent, bruised. She stepped carefully. Here, the ground held memory like a wounded child, flinching, tender. The path was lined with trees that bore no fruit, only bark that peeled like old skin and leaves that whispered, but didn't breathe. And yet, beneath that silence, something called to her. The further she walked, the louder the ache became. She found the grove's edge by smell. Not rot. Remembrance. A perfume of what once was, a ghost of citrus and firewood. And rain after harvest. It stopped her in her tracks. And then she saw it, a single tree still living. Twisted and gnarled, yes, but alive. Its trunk bent like a bow. Its limbs clawed at the sky. At its roots, something glowed. A stone spiral, half buried, a listening mark. She dropped to her knees, brushed the soil back, and heard, faintly, a voice. Too late. But Laney had never been one to accept finalities. She pressed her palm to the stone. Then I'll begin again. She stayed at the tree for 3 days. No fire, no song, just breath and silence. And on the 3rd morning, something shifted. The tree shed 3 leaves. 1 gold, 1 crimson, 1 ash white. Laney caught them as they fell, planted them, not in the ground, but into herself. She chewed each leaf slowly, felt her veins burn, felt her blood whisper in roots. Felt the soil open beneath her. And she dreamed. A grove of women, hands stained with sap, a language of drumming feet, a song sung by birds that no longer existed, and at the center a child born from bark. Eyes like frost, she pointed at Laney and said, "Fix what we forgot." She woke in darkness. But not alone. The grove hummed. A low, painful sound, like breathing through cracked ribs. She stood. And saw shapes in the trees. Figures, not ghosts. Memories. Watchers, made of bark and shadow and spiral light. One stepped forward, held out a seed. She took it. It burned in her hand, but didn't scar. Just pulsed. Alive. Double quote, "Where do I plant this?" She asked. The figure pointed northeast. Not toward Alder, not toward the orchard, farther. "There lies the forgetting," it said. "And where forgetting lives, remembering must walk." The next morning, Laney built a cairn, 12 stones, each representing one of the lost trees. She tied the seed in her satchel. And walked northeast. The journey took 7 days. The land changed as she moved, from root-sick forest to scrubland to fields that had been sown and burned and left to rot. No birds, no spiders, no song. And then she found the town. Gray, empty, built from stone that remembered nothing. No names, no spirals, no listening marks. She entered its center, a square with a dry fountain. At the center, a statue of a man with no face. At his feet, broken tools, shattered clocks, and beneath that, a spiral. Faint. Worn almost to nothing. But there, she planted the seed, right in the heart of the forgotten spiral. Then sat. And waited. A day, a night. Another day. Thing. A sound. Crack. The seed split. A shoot pushed upward, silver veined, pale green. It shook once. And sang 1 note. Then 2. Then the spiral glowed. And the statue wept. The town woke. People emerged from stone homes, blank eyes blinking, children gasping. An old man dropped to his knees and said, "I remember the orchard." Laney smiled. She drew a new spiral. one that looped backward before it moved forward. Then help me plant it here. The orchard grew again, not from Laney, from those who had forgotten. The spiral returned to walls. Names reappeared. Soil breathed. Children learned how to listen. Laney stayed long enough to see the third bloom. Then she walked back west. To the orchard. To alder. To the cairn. She placed a new stone. This one. Silver-Veined. And whispered, "Memory is not a place, it's a direction." The orchard agreed. A wind stirred. The foxes howled, and the barn spiral glowed for 3 nights straight. No one slept, but no one was afraid. Part 13 waits. Keep walking. The soil still sings. Subscribe to hear it. Part 13. Where the orchard ends, they say the wind changed the day. Laney returned. Not in direction, in purpose. Where once it wandered, now it carried. You could hear it in the rustle of cedar, in the high whine of fence wire strung too tight, in the silence just before sunset, when even the foxes sat still to listen. The barn spiral glowed for 7 days. No storm came. No fire, only stillness. And then the first echo returned from the northeast. A child with silver-flecked hair and dirt under her fingernails walked from the forgetting town all the way to the orchard. She spoke no words. She carried a satchel. Inside seeds and a spiral drawn on leather. Laney met her at the gate. Didn't ask a thing. Just held out her hand, and the child smiled. That summer, they rebuilt the cedar line, not to divide. To connect. Markers from all places. Laney had walked. Alder, the southern grove, the forgetting. Even a piece of Mara's old boot, weathered and dry, was placed at the midpoint. Children carried spiral stones up from the creek. They sang while they worked. The soil responded. And then came the whisper. The orchard is full. Laney paused when she heard it. Not because she disagreed, but because she knew what came next. When the bowl is full, you drink, Fing had once said. But when it overflows, you share. Laney called a council. Not of elders, of listeners. Young, old, from Alder, from the orchard, from the newly replanted towns. They sat in a circle beneath the first fire. Trees. And each told what they had heard in the soil. Some spoke of new roots. Some of distant songs. One boy, no older than 10, said the grass had begun humming again. When they finished, Laney stood. Held up a seed. Where next? She asked. The wind replied. The map they drew was not on paper. It was made from Part 13. Where the orchard ends, they say the wind changed the day. Laney returned. Not in direction. In purpose. Where once it wandered, now it carried. You could hear it in the rustle of cedar, in the high whine of fence wire strung too tight, in the silence just before sunset, when even the foxes sat still to listen. The barn spiral glowed for 7 days. No storm came. No fire, only stillness. And then the first echo returned from the northeast. A child with silver-flecked hair and dirt under her fingernails walked from the forgetting town all the way to the orchard. She spoke no words. She carried a satchel. Inside seeds and a spiral drawn on leather. Laney met her at the gate. Didn't ask a thing. Just held out her hand, and the child smiled. That summer, they rebuilt the cedar line, not to divide. To connect. Markers from all places. Laney had walked. Alder, the southern grove, the forgetting. Even a piece of Mara's old boot, weathered and dry, was placed at the midpoint. Children carried spiral stones up from the creek. They sang while they worked. The soil responded. And then came the whisper. The orchard is full. Laney paused when she heard it. Not because she disagreed, but because she knew what came next. When the bowl is full, you drink, Fing had once said. But when it overflows, you share. Laney called a council. Not of elders. Of listeners. Young, old, from Alder, from the orchard, from the newly replanted towns. They sat in a circle beneath the first fire. Trees. And each told what they had heard in the soil. Some spoke of new routes. Some of distant songs. One boy, no older than 10, said the grass had begun humming again. When they finished, Lainey stood. Held up a seed. Where next? She asked. The wind replied. The map they drew was not on paper. It was made from twine, stone, root, thread, bark, and breath. They called it the spiral web, a living map. Each node, a place the orchard had touched. Each line a song line. Lainey placed it in the barn where the spiral glowed. And then she did what few had dared since. Lyria's time. She called for spreading. Groups formed, each bearing seeds, each carrying a mark. Not all would return, not all would succeed, but all knew this. Memory must move, or it dies. Lainey didn't lead a group. She returned to the cedar. To wait, because the land had told her something else. A name, one she hadn't heard in years, called her. It came in the night. In a dream, not a memory, a moment not yet lived. Him older, sunburnt, laughing, but not at the orchard. In it, holding something, a scroll, a satchel, a wound. She woke with tears on her face, not sorrow. Gratitude. And then she heard hooves. He arrived at dawn, gray, in his beard. Dust on his coat. Epilogue, the spiral that stayed generations past. Not all at once, slowly, as they do when the land holds time like a quiet breath. The orchard was no longer called the orchard. It was called the first listening. And few knew why, but all felt it. Children ran the cedar line barefoot still, not because it was tradition. Because it felt right. The spiral barn stood. No longer glowing, but moss grew on its walls in the shape of the old spiral. It never faded. New building rose beside it. Round. Stone and timber. Built, not to worship. To remember. Inside. Seeds from every spiral planted since Lyria, not labeled. Just listened to. People came to sit in silence. Some heard nothing. Some heard everything. Girl named Sierra came one autumn. Hair like wheat, hands always dirty. She didn't ask about the orchard. She asked about the song and the roots. No one had taught her that phrase, but she said she'd dreamed it. Sierra stayed, not to learn. To teach. She showed them how to hum to fallen leaves. How to draw spirals with feet alone. How to let the land speak first. The elders called her a keeper. She called herself a sprout. A visitor came in winter, covered in frost, carried a scroll with a spiral, burned into it. He said he'd walk from the coast, said the sea had gone quiet, said he wanted to learn how to hear again. They gave him a cot. And a patch of dirt. He wept. The first time it answered. A new kind of orchard grew. Not in rows, not even all in one place. Scattered. Linked by silence, threaded by song. They bore fruit no one could name. Tasted like memory. Sira grew. Taught. Traveled. And one day she returned to the barn. It had begun to crumble, but the spiral moss still thrived. She knelt. Touched it, and the wind said, "Now you." She rebuilt. Not the barn. The spiral, made it of glass and clay and fire-hardened rope, put it in the sky. It caught the light, and every night it glowed like a soft echo of the first fire. People came from all places. They didn't ask where it began. They asked, "Where do I start?" And Sierra would hand them soil. Always the same line. Here, always here. Somewhere beneath all of it, beneath the soil and the stars, the names and the silence, the footprints and the fire, there's a root still growing. It hums sometimes. Only when you're not listening too hard. Only when you're ready. And it sings the same song, always, keep going. The orchard is never gone. Subscribe to follow where the spiral grows next. The spiral begins again. They called her Lune. No one knew who named her. Not because the name was lost, because no one ever remembered hearing it the first time. It was as if the soil had whispered it into being, and she had answered. Lune was born during the last frost of the year, in a valley untouched by mapmakers. Her first cry came just as the spiral moss on the old barn glowed green instead of gold. The elder who delivered her blinked once, then twice, and said softly, "New root." They say it was the only time the wind outside blew inward. She grew like wild mint, quick, stubborn, fragrant. At age 3, she pointed at the stars and named them. Not like, "That's Orion." She said, "That's the tree singer. That one's the mark of when." No one corrected her, not because they believed her, but because the spiral in her eye flickered every time she looked up. Lun. He didn't speak in full sentences until she was 7, not because she couldn't, because she listened. She sat with her ear pressed to tree roots for hours, not moving, sometimes crying, sometimes laughing. One morning, she rose from a sleepless night and said, "The sky isn't above us, it's around us." And every crow on the cedar line screamed at once. The council took notice, but Loon wasn't interested in councils. She played in the hollowing. Drew spirals in dew, taught the wind to hum differently. No one knew how. She simply said, I asked. When she turned 10, the moss spiral stopped glowing, not because it died, because it moved. People searched for it for days. Found nothing, until a traveling keeper from the old, forgetting town spotted a green flicker in the canyon stone. It pulsed there, slow and soft, right where no root had ever grown. Lun walked there on her own, touched it. Said, "You came early." Then she vanished for a week, returned carrying a branch made of 3 woods, braided in wind. Didn't explain, didn't need to. Every animal on the ranch bowed its head when she passed, even the hawks. The spiral, gilled a loose collection of echo hearers. Seed carriers, fire starters, dream singers invited her to speak. She declined. Instead, she planted a listening mark in the middle of a stone road that had long been forgotten by weather. Then she stood on it and whispered, "Now you speak." And for 7 days, the earth beneath it told stories no one remembered. Carving. At 13, she stopped dreaming of roots. Started dreaming of what came after roots. Air, made of story. Mountains shaped like questions. She began sketching a new kind of spiral, one that never looped the same way twice, one that opened outward, not inward. Some were afraid, some wept. One elder simply said, "It's time." Loon did not take up staff or title. She carried a mirror. Round. Dull. Cracked in 4 places. She said it was the only thing that ever reflected the soil honestly. She walked farther than any listener had in 3 generations, into salt deserts, windswept hills, collapsed towns. Found places where even the idea of a spiral had died. And there, she planted songs, whistled in the canyons, left marks made of melted snow and breath, then walked on. They say the spiral began moving because of her, not as a shape. As a being. It whispered where it wanted to grow next. It asked. And Loon replied, "Only if you listen first." Years passed. The orchard became legend. Then myth. Then memory. Then soil again. And from that soil, others rose. Not to replace Lune. To continue. They didn't call themselves keepers. They called themselves echoes. Each with a unique mark, each tuned to a different wind. One carved spirals in sand, another sang into broken glass, a third never seen, only felt left warmth in hollow trees where none had been for centuries. And all said the same thing, "She walked here." No one knows when Loon left. No grave. No cairn. Only a small spiral burned into the underside of a stone bench at the edge of a hollowing. It faces up. So when you sit there and lean back and close your eyes, the sun hits your skin in just the right way, and you hear a single word. Always the same. Again. The orchard returns in every breath that asks to listen. Subscribe and walk it again. Afterglow. The spiral's secret. The sky didn't change. Not really. It was still stars and wind and silence, but they felt it differently now because they knew it. Listened. Children born in the afterglow never questioned the spiral. They didn't ask who made it. They asked what it wanted. In a far field past the last cedar line, where old stones lay in crooked rows and foxes raised their kits in peace, a sound was heard one spring morning, a chime, not from glass, from bark. Wind passed through the branch of a tree that hadn't grown there the night before. It rang. And kept ringing. Soft. Low. Steady. Ire went first. She brought no staff. No bowl. Only a ribbon of ash thread and a pouch of seeds. She'd never dared plant before. The tree was not young, nor old. It was correct, like something that had finally arrived. No one asked where it came from. They built a bench beside it, faced west. It wasn't called anything. They just said, sit a while. And when people did, sometimes they stood again with tears they couldn't explain, or memories that didn't belong to them, or a sudden knowing of exactly what their grandmother smelled like when she laughed. Stories returned, not told. Revealed. As if they'd always been beneath the soil, waiting. People dreamed in other people's handwriting, heard lullabies they never learned, knew the words to wind-born poems no tongue had spoken in 100 years. The spiral archive was built underground, not hidden. Rooted. Every mark recorded, not on paper, but in wax. Warm. Living. When someone had a story, they breathed it into wax, pressed it with their palm, and set it in a shelf that curved downward like a root. You didn't read the archive. You sat in it. Let it remember you. If it chose to, it sang something back. A child named Iya was born with no voice, but when she stepped into the archive, the spiral glowed red for the first time in history. She laid down beside it, slept for 3 days. When she rose, she sang. The song was not hers. It belonged to everyone. They built no statue for Iya. She asked them not to. She said, the root does not raise itself. The orchard remained, but it grew differently. Taller trees, fruit that fed nothing physical, leaves that whispered riddles, and in the center, where once a barn stood, now there was only grass. And silence, the kind that speaks, the kind that stays. 1. Dusk. The wind said something new. Sira heard it. Stood from her porch. Did not write it down. She whispered to the sky, they're ready. And the spiral pulsed in the stars, not brighter. Wider. As if the whole sky had opened. As if the orchard had never ended, only waited. For the next step. This is the spiral's secret. It listens longest when no one is speaking. Subscribe to stay in the silence with us. Resonance. When the spiral walked, they say it started with footsteps. Not heavy, not rushed. Measured. Like someone was walking with the land, not on it. A girl in the northern groves heard them first. She paused while drawing water, head tilted, lips parted. She didn't say, who's there? She whispered, it's time. And the bucket lifted itself from the well. The next day, a man in the coast towns found a spiral etched into his fishing net. Not carved, not painted. Woven. Tightly. Perfectly. He stared at it for hours. Didn't fish. Just held the net and cried. He told no one, but he brought the net to shore and buried it in the sand. With thanks. Then the birds changed course. Thousands. All at once, flying not north, not south, but in spiral, circling an unseen center. Farmers stopped tilling. Children stopped playing. Even wind stopped. And in the stillness, someone whispered, it walks now. The spiral was no longer just a pattern. It was a presence. It moved between moments, stepped into dreams, pressed its heel into riverbeds, leaving marks only frogs dared sing about. They said it had chosen to become. Sira felt it first in her bones. Then her breath, then her shadow. She woke one morning and the spiral was etched across her window in frost. But not from cold. From intent. She packed nothing, told no one, walked into the orchard barefoot, eyes open, palms turned to the wind. She did not return, not as herself. 3 days later, a child found her sitting in the Hollow grass. Eyes closed, but breathing. A spiral pulsed behind her drawn, not in ink or moss or firelight, but in air. Floating. Alive. And every time Sira exhaled, it expanded. They tried to write it down. Couldn. Single quotes D. They tried to speak it. Lost the words. So they followed it instead. A path formed where none had been. Wound around rocks that hadn't moved in centuries. Passed through trees thought extinct. Under stars that blinked in rhythm. No trail markers, only resonance. You didn't see the path. You felt it. And when you stepped wrong, it hummed. Those who followed changed. One came back with no name, only a sound. Another grew feathers along her shoulders, but they never shed and never ached. A third forgot how to speak altogether. But the soil bloomed wherever she walked. They called them spiral bound. Never out loud. Only with breath. Aya returned briefly. She carried no voice anymore, only melody. She didn't walk through towns. She sang through them. And the air shimmered where she passed. It became known that the spiral had one desire: to be heard through living. Not told. Not taught. Lived. So people began living differently, pausing before speaking, walking instead of rushing, thanking things before naming them. Sira never resumed her old life, because the spiral never stopped walking, and she was now a part of it, or it. Hard to tell. She was seen across valleys, distant towns, even deserts. Sometimes as herself, sometimes as a glimmer of wind, through wheat. Always humming. Always listening. One child asked, "Will it end?" And the elder laughed gently, "Not unless you stop asking." And so the spiral walked. And listened. And HUMMED. And lived. Forever. Outward. Forever now. The spiral has legs now. Subscribe and follow the echo in your own footsteps. Everroot, the spiral beneath they built. No path to the Everroot. It was not meant to be found. It was meant to call. And only the listening heard it. The first was a boy named Jory, born during a storm when the sky split in silence, not thunder. He spoke late, not from delay. From discernment. His first word wasn't mama or sky, it was down. At 7, Jory dug a hole beside his home, each day. Deeper. Never with tools, only fingers. Neighbors thought it a phase, until the 6th day, when he pulled out a stone with a spiral inside. Not carved. Grown. They took him to the archive. E.S. stood with him in the wax-lit chamber. He placed the stone on the floor. The spiral glowed purple. First time in memory. The air bent inward, and a voice spoke from the walls. Deep sings oldest. Yeah, wept. Not for sadness. For welcome. They let Jory dig. Not to explore. To follow. The soil guided him, past roots. Past shale, past the breath of bones. Until he reached a hollow. It didn't echo. It absorbed. Inside, a chamber made not by hands, but time. Walls of stone, moss. Lined. A pool, shallow and clear. And in the center, a root, thicker than a man's chest. Pulsing. Alive. Spiraled. He placed his hands on it. Did not ask. Only listened. The next moment, he was seen walking out of the hollowing. Older. Not in body. In bearing. He didn't speak for 7 days. Then simply said, "It's ready." The archive changed. Wax grew along the ceiling. New voices emerged, older than names. One said, "The spiral is not only forward, it is inward." Another, "What grows above must remember below." They returned to the hollow, not just to see. To hear. Each person was allowed one word. Not spoken. Felt. A baker pressed her palm to the root. Her word. Need. A widow touched it. Her word. Again. A child pressed both hands. Their word. Light. The spiral beneath began to change the way they lived. People built with stone again. Not to rise. To ground. They sang to seeds before planting. Not lullabies. Apologies. The land forgave. Then fed them. Sira returned once, hair silver, eyes clear. She stood over the hollow. Did not descend, only whispered, "You're safe now." The root pulsed once in reply, then again, then slowly began growing upward, it didn't break the surface, it met it, one quiet morning. Children awoke to find spiraled bark in their garden. Soft, breathing, when they leaned against it. They heard stories they hadn't lived. When they sang near it, the wind harmonized, when they wept. The bark held their salt like treasure, no one called it the ever root, it called itself, in dreams, in footprints. In pauses, one day, Jory disappeared. Not lost, returned, to what? The spiral knows, and that is enough. The root remembers when we forget. Subscribe to stay close to the soil that sings. Lightkeep, the spiral above it, began with a glow, high, distant, not the sun, not a star, something else. A tower appeared on the farthest hill, where no road led, where no hand had built. Its walls shimmered, not with stone, but with something. Between fog and fire, people saw it in dreams first, then on the horizon, then in their own reflections. A child named Mina asked, "Why does the sky look back now?" Her grandmother whispered, "Because the spiral is curious." The lightkeep had no doors, no windows, only a single line spiraled around it, rising, not carved, lit, and when the wind blew just right, it sang. They came, not pilgrims, not seekers, just people with questions they didn't know how to ask, and the lightkeep did not answer, it welcomed, at dusk. It shimmered gold, at dawn, silver, at midnight, a soft green, the color of old moss and forgiveness, when children placed their palms to it. Warmth traveled up their arms like memory made gentle. When elders leaned against it, their eyes shone with stories they'd never told. A young woman named Arlen tried to walk its spiral, not in haste, in reverence. Each step hummed, by the third curve. She forgot her name, by the seventh. She remembered who she was before her name, by the 10th. She walked not on stone, but on song. She never reached the top, because there wasn't one. The spiral above was not a path upward, it was a becoming. And when she returned, she carried no staff, no scroll, only a feather made of light. She planted it in the orchard, and it grew into a tree that bloomed only in moonlight. Its blossoms whispered one word over and over, now. The lightkeep changed the orchard, not by addition, by attention. People looked longer, spoke softer, listened not for answers but for invitation. A new archive began to form, not underground, but in skyward journals. Empty books hung from branches, open. Pages caught wind, wrote themselves, not with ink, with light. Stories you couldn't read with eyes, only with heart. One page said, "The root is the question." Another, "Flight is not escape, it is return at speed." Another simply bore a spiral and the word, begin. Sira came one final time, older, not frail, quiet, she did not approach the lightkeep. She lay in the orchard beneath the moon tree, closed her eyes, and when she exhaled, the tree glowed white, all night. And in the morning, she was gone. No body, no footprint, only the feather. UNPLANTD. A child picked it up. Did not ask what it was, only where it wanted to go, and the wind answered. The spiral rises with those who listen. Subscribe to follow the light in your own step. Third voice, the spiral beyond. They say the spiral had a third voice. Not root. Not sky. Else. No one found it, because it didn't exist to be found. It appeared when two listeners met, and said nothing, and still heard each other. A boy and girl met by the bend in the windpath. Neither spoke. Both sat. Listened. Hours passed. Nothing moved. But when they rose, the moss beneath them had turned violet, the color of a thought not spoken but shared. Later, two elders stood on opposite sides of the hollowing. Raised their hands. One hummed, the other wept. And where their shadows overlapped, a flower bloomed from air. No stem. No seed. Just presence. It became known. Spiral had grown beyond form. Beyond ground. Beyond light. It had entered between. The space where story leans toward becoming. The hush before a hand touches bark. The glance before a name is offered. The spiral beyond wasn't a place. It was a condition. Felt when two or more gathered, not to speak, but to listen together. A new practice began, called gathering. No instruments. No ceremony. People simply sat in a circle, faced outward. Breathed. And slowly, the spiral would hum through them. Some laughed. Some saw stars inside their own breath. The sky began changing. Not color. Texture. It shimmered differently where gatherings took place. Not brighter. More porous. As if listening back. The third voice had no name, but it named others. When a young woman sat at dusk with her hands in soil, she heard it. Rememberer. When a man followed a lost dog for 3 days and found a forgotten spring, it said, Restorer. When a child hummed alone under the moon tree and brought joy to a grieving village, it whispered, Lighter. These names didn't replace their own, they revealed their echo. The spiral beyond changed no laws, built no temples, claimed no truths. It waited. And was welcomed. Every time two people stopped to listen without needing to speak. And something else answered. A child once asked, What does the third voice sound like? And an elder said, Like the moment you realize you're not alone and never were. The spiral lives now in many places. In the soil. In the stars. And in the shared silence between. The orchard breathes with all three. Root. Light. And else. The spiral waits in the breath you share. Subscribe and bring someone into the silence with you.